Welcome to Studium Generale of the TU Delft and the Decolonising Knowledge lecture series. My name is Klaas van der Tempel. Our guest today is Jamie van Lede. He's an architect and alumnus of our own university here in Delft. Jamie is also a co-founder of Origins Architects, which is an architecture bureau, not far from here actually, that specializes in eco-friendly and energy-efficient designs. Together with us in the studio right now is Annelien Magielsen, who is an industrial ecology student. She's off camera for now because of corona distancing, but we'll be switching places later on in the lecture so that she can also ask Jamie some questions. So for today's talk, we've asked Jamie to tell us about his unique approach to design and engineering, in which he combines elements from both traditional, time-tested engineering, as well as the more familiar modern Western methods. Hence the title of our lecture, How to Combine Ancient and Modern Wisdom. There will be a Q&A at the end, but first, Jamie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Klaas and Annelien, for having me here. My career as an architect started when I was 6, actually, and it all started out with a bird's nest, which you can see here. When I was 6, my parents gave me a toolkit, a hammer of wood and a saw of wood, and this really made my day. I mean, I was so happy that I had tools to actually make stuff. And then we moved to Belgium in a house that needed to be renovated. And there were all these loose parcels of wood in the garage. And I thought, well, if I have the toolkit, why not build something? And I built this archetypal little house, and I was working on it. And the next day I wanted to pursue my first design. And the little house was gone. So I asked my dad what happened to it. And he pointed through the window and he said, look, it's in a tree. I put it in a tree as a tree house, as a birdhouse, sorry. And I was mesmerized that I had built something which could actually be a home for an animal, for a living creature. And a few days after that, a bird actually entered the little house and started making its nest. I thought, wow, this is amazing. And that's the moment when my dad said, maybe you should become an architect. I'd never heard of the term architect. And later on, I discovered that it comes from the Greek architecton, which means the head carpenter. So it has more to do with craftsmanship than actual design. So I really dedicated what I wanted to become an architect. And we moved quite a lot. We lived in England and Belgium and in South Africa, and I was also born in Canada. So I saw quite a bit of the world before going to university. And in these years before university, I was always looking at buildings, having decided to become an architect. And I was always fascinated how every landscape had produced its own unique building technology and how that seemed to fit the landscape in terms of beauty. And then I came to the TU and I thought, okay, I'm finally going to get my diploma and start my real career. And we had our first assignment at the Faculty of Architecture. It was design a house. So I asked the professor, where is this house supposed to be? And he shrugged and he said, wherever, it doesn't really matter. I thought, how can I design something when I don't know where the view is, what the local materials are, where the wind comes from, or where the sun shines? I need a place to build. And he said, you can think up of anything. It doesn't really matter. So I drew this little house and they nearly flunked me. And I said, no, this is not what architecture is. And they came up with Villa Savoie, which is a famous modernist building by Le Corbusier, which is one of the most famous modern architects. And I said, this is what architecture is about. It's architecture with a capital A, and it really doesn't matter if you're building in the Amazon or in Alaska. Technique will solve everything. So just concern yourself with beauty and architecture, as we'll teach you, and the rest will follow. And he said, the Corbusier said, a house is a machine for living in. And I really lost it there. I thought, what am I doing here? This isn't about community. It isn't about craft. It isn't about culture. It isn't about landscape. So I started this discussion with the professor, and he said, okay. And he called in his other peer professors, and he said, okay, we've got one of those idealist, romantic students again. Let's talk to him. And they showed me the Belmar. And the Belmar is, of course, one of these great housing projects post-war. And one of the professors had actually built this, and I said, this is architecture. And I said, but I hate this. This has nothing to do with humanity. This has nothing to do with context. This has nothing to do with place and topos and craftsmanship. So we got into an argument, and I decided for myself that this university wasn't going to give me what I was looking for, but I did want to finish it to get my diploma and become an architect. So in the meantime, I started reading my own books, and there's this beautiful quote by Mark Twain that says, "Don't let school stand in the way of your education." So I saw the 6 years that I studied in university as a wild card to educate myself, and also, of course, get the diploma and do the standard curriculum. But especially I started reading up into books on vernacular architecture, and the most famous one is the book Architecture Without Architects by Bernard Rudowski, who in 1964 did an exhibition in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, talking about vernacular architecture, so local architecture, which was pre-modern. And it fascinated me because it showed how resilient humankind had been in the most harsh of landscapes, and always had devised beautiful solutions to the climate. So if you look on the picture to the right, these are desert houses in Afghanistan, and there's this big chimney which actually catches the wind, cools the whole house, while also being very beautiful in my point of view. And if you look at any building, especially the Dutch barn where I live in now, it's always a functional solution to a practical problem. So imagine in the Dutch polder here, where there's only a few materials, and you're a farmer, and you need a roof, you need a dry place for your cattle. So what do? You scout the surroundings looking for the local materials available. And so there's clay which you can make bricks with, there's hay where you can thatch the roof with, and there's a bit of timber and wood around where you can make the construction with. And that's what they did. They made these archetypal buildings with the short end in the wind. And so the story goes, by merging all these materials in the point of the roof, it sometimes leaked. So somewhere in evolution, a smart farmer said, why, instead of having all these materials come together in one point, which will leak, let's spread it over 3 points. And so they did. But what also happened is that the shape of the farm became more aerodynamic, like the hull of a ship. So the energy wasn't sucked out anymore. The building would last longer because it could withstand the wind. And there was also a place in front of the shed where there was no wind at all, where the cattle would lie. So this building actually became a brilliant solution to its environment. And it never had an architect with a fancy design glasses that said, well, we're going to do it like this. And the thing is, if you take one of these buildings and you turn them around 90 degrees, they don't work anymore. Take them away and put them 1,000 kilometers up north, say Denmark, they won't work anymore. So they're dedicated to the landscape. And there's this beautiful quote by Stephen Hall who says, "Architecture not so much intrudes on a landscape as it does to explain it." And if you look at an igloo, for example, in the harsh climate of the Arctic, there's only one material to build with, and that's snow. And snow, with snow you can build bricks, of course, but bricks can't have tension forces, only compression forces. So you build a dome, which, matter of factly, is also the shape that has the least surface with the most content. So you don't lose the heat that is in there. So somehow this is the best possible solution for that climate. If you look at the yurts of Afghanistan, nothing grows there, only grass. So the only animal that will eat the grass is the sheep and the goats. And you can use the wool to make filled tents, which are easy to pick up and travel. And I've spent some time in Mongolia, and they're the most comfortable thing. Even in minus 30 winters and plus 30 summers, they will provide the thermal comfort that is needed over there. So these are the kind of buildings that would inspire me instead of the Bijlmer. And the thing is, it's not new. It's also called convergent evolution. If you look at animals, say if you look on the two animals on the left, there's a shark and a dolphin. Basically, they look similar in shape, but the one is a mammal and the other one is a fish. But they both evolved into this wonderful shape because apparently it works well in the water. If you look on the right, there's an eagle and there's a bat, the one being a bird, the other being a mammal, that both evolved into the same shape because apparently this worked in flying through the air. So look at nature first if you are looking for solutions in architecture, and that's what I do. I like to read up about vernacular architecture, and I like biomimicry, which is learning from nature, copying nature. As nature has had 300 million years of research and development, and there's many solutions that can be used right now in technical problems. Now, just to make my point clear, I'm not in favor of going back in time and romanticizing old farmer sheds and saying that that is what we should rebuild. My point is that we've thrown away a lot of wisdom which used to be intrinsic in our culture when we became modern and technological. And if you look at this picture in Montreal, which I took not far away from the place where I was born, you see this little stone shed, which apparently worked very well 400 years ago, and then something bigger came with bricks already, and then even a bigger building. And if you look at the building at the back, it's suddenly steel and glass. And I think something went wrong along the way. So what I propose is that we have to take a few steps back and really look at our history of building and designing. And there's this beautiful quote by Paul Ricoeur, who says, it's a paradox. You have to return to a dormant civilization, but also take part in universal modern civilization. So the big question is, how do you combine modernity with the 7,000 years of building tradition that we have worldwide? And I think I have the answer. And I think the big inspiration project that I have in this is the cultural center in New Caledonia, built by Renzo Piano, who's most famous for the Centre Pompidou in Paris. And he got the assignment to build a cultural center on the island of New Caledonia, which is in the Pacific Ocean. Very hot area, nothing in the surroundings. And he had a tight budget, and he said, okay, well, I'm probably going to spend all my budget on airco and technology to get it comfortable. So he said, why don't I look at the context first? Let's see who has been living here for the last 1,000 years and what we can learn from them. And you see the little hut on the left there. The Kanak people built huts, and what they did, they used timber, which was also a bit of bamboo, and they built these beautiful conical huts. But the other thing they did is they took the local grasses and they wove them into a facade pattern, closing the building. And the thing is with the woven pattern is that when the warm winds went through, little vortexes would come into existence and cool the inside of the hut. So there was this very simple low-tech solution to a problem. So Renzo Piano really analyzed this and translated it into his modern architecture. And by doing so, he saved up to 30% on the technology, which he could spend on architecture and other beautiful stuff. So this is a beautiful example where old knowledge and new knowledge get together and add up to beautiful architecture. And basically what you're doing is you're plucking the low-hanging fruit. There's this beautiful little schema always used that if you have no technology, you have no costs. If you have high-tech solutions, they're usually expensive. So when people come to me and said, I want a house with solar panels and a heat pump because I want it to be sustainable, I'll usually say, why don't we start at the beginning? Let's start with a good house, a well-designed house. Let's look at orientation. Let's look at isolation. Let's look at all these free measures which cost no money at all. And when we've done that properly, the amount of the technology or the amount of money to be spent on technology will be less than if we had started off with that. And I see a lot of architects that still do this. So they'll design a house and then the installation guy will say, so where's the central heating? And they said, oh, well, we forgot about that. We'll put it on the attic. So if I'm sure you're familiar with this, in the kitchen you'll need warm water, so you open a tap and first 12 liters of cold water comes out, which you flush away. You wash your hands, you close the tap, and 12 liters of water is still in the pipes and it's actually cooling down and you're throwing energy away, which simply doesn't make sense. So if the heating and the tap had been close to each other in the first place, due to good design, it would have saved money, it would have saved comfort, and it would have been better for the climate. So I think this is the premise of all good design. Anyway, after reading all these books, I started for myself, and I started with what is called the elemental house. And the design approach I coined context, culture, concept. Context, culture, concept. So you look at a context first, you look at the way people had been building in such a context before you came, for the thousands of years before you came, and you translate that into a modern concept for a current architecture. But you can look worldwide. So if you look at an isolation solution for a house in Holland, why not wonder how people isolated their houses in Siberia 200 years ago, where it's of course much colder and they had to be much more inventive to solve that. And if you look at ventilation problems, why not look at solutions from Indonesia from 200 years ago, where it's hot and humid and you really need to ventilate things. So I'm sure you know the Indonesian architecture with its high ceilings, force ventilating the warm, humid air. So we made this well, like a recipe book of measures from vernacular architecture all around the world, and we translated them into Dutch recipes, and it actually won me the first Good Green Design Award in the Netherlands. After that, of course, all went well. Al Gore came with the movie, and the office grew and grew, and we've had many projects since then. But we still work on this same premise. And the other interesting thing is that if, like I said, you can look for inspiration around the world, but we're also building around the world. We've done projects in Greece, we're in Aruba, and we're actually working on a project in Madagascar now. And if you look at the map of Madagascar, it has a multiple climates, but the area where we're building in now is the dark blue area, which compares to, for instance, Indonesia. So we looked at what building solutions they found in Indonesia, and see if we could adapt them to the Madagascar solution, and it actually worked. So we're building this big holiday house now. And it has no airco, it has no windows, it has no ventilation systems, and it probably works better than any of the modern houses which are there with mirror glass and expensive imported ventilation systems that will break down due to the sand that is blown in. So again, a no-tech solution, freeing budgets to make beautiful architecture. And concerning the theme of these lectures, I think there's a nice little anecdote. Madagascar was colonized by the French. When the French came, before the French came, people would have built their roofs with local palm leaves, and they would have inside fires. But they'd spend the day outside, so they weren't near the smoke. And the thing is about the fire is, of course, it produces smoke, and the smoke would go into the roof and kill all the termites and the critters and bugs. So the roof would last for about 20 to 30 years. When the French came, they said, no, you can't have fires inside. So they prohibited that. And these Madagascar people said, why? And so, well, anyway, they had to make their fires outside, with the consequences that the roofs would rot after 2 years, and they would have to redo their roof again. So the French were imposing something on a local community which had worked for decades and even millennia, and it became a disaster. So again, here in this beautiful house, we're also having inside fires. How strange that sounds, to get all the termites out. And the other thing is that, talking about culture, is there's this quote by Winston Churchill who says, first we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us. And the story goes that when the Germans bombed London in the Second World War, the House of Parliament was bombed. And after, it had to be rebuilt, and it was a big lobby for making a whole new building which was bigger and had more room. And Churchill said, no, we can't do that, because our whole democracy is based on the two-party system, which was the only possible solution in this building, where people are sitting opposed to each other. So he said, we have to rebuild it as it was. But anyway, the quote stuck, and I usually use it on this picture of an aerial photo of a kasbah in Marrakesh. And you can ask yourself, was the Moroccan community very close-knit so that they decided to live close to each other? Or did they become close-knit because they had to build close to each other? And the second answer is the right answer, because building in the desert, of course, it's hot. So you can build a house here and your neighbor can build a house here, but you'd have to cross the scorching sun for hundreds of meters, which wouldn't really make sense. So if you put them closer to each other, there's a shorter distance and you can actually live in each other's shadow. And that's how big kasbahs like the one in Marrakesh evolved, because the good thing is that when there's a cool desert wind at night and all the streets have the same thickness, it will actually cool every building. And if you look at there's these courtyards at the center of houses which force ventilate these buildings. So Moroccan community became a close-knit community because they had to built next to each other in this scorching desert. So I think culture is as much part of the architecture design process as building materials and craftsmanship. And I think we tend to forget about that. And if you stamp everything down to a concept, then I think there's the on the right side, you see this little marble on a hill. It will fall off if you don't point your parameters at the marble, if you don't keep it in its place by force. Well, on the other hand, if you make a curve the other way around and you put the marble in, so you put your parameters on the curve, the marble will stay. This is a bit of a strange explanation to what I'm trying to say, but if you look on the right-hand picture, these are paprikas being grown in what do you call them? The greenhouses here in Holland, and everything is drip fed. There's a computer managing the amount of water, the amount of ingredients, the amount of sun that is coming in, and it works. But I mean, if the electricity falls out, you have a problem. The picture on top is a biodynamic grown pepper where you feed the ground. You don't worry about the pepper. You make sure the ground is healthy, the soil is healthy, the insects living there are healthy, and you'll get a much more resilient type of context. You'll have healthy ground which can absorb water, which will deal with days that are too hot, which will actually feed the paprika instead of you having to import food for it. And the other, I think you can compare it to architecture as well. If you look on the bottom picture, this is a high-tech building in Germany. Doesn't use any energy at all, but it's completely high-tech. There's no natural material in there at all, which makes it very kwetsbaar, which means vulnerable. Thank you, Klaas. If you look on the picture on the top, this is a building by Glenn Murcutt, one of the Pritzker Prize winning, which is the Oscar of architecture winning Australian architects, was built 500 houses in Australia, and it's completely adapted to the surroundings, to the context. He knows where the sun goes up, the overhang of the roof will be decided by the amount of sun that is allowed to come through, the shutters are hand navigated, and these buildings work without technique, like the house in Madagascar. But this also works in the education system. And like I said, I was very disappointed when I came to study architecture at the Technical University because I had a whole different picture of what that would be. And this whole concept of a control system and an organic system with the two little marbles also applies to being a student, I guess, is that on the modern academic system, you get a standard curriculum and that's what you're being taught and they send you into the world with that and that's it. But that says nothing about you. I mean, you're cookie cuts to become a good architecture or a standard architect. But if you look at the term academy, it comes from the akademos, which was an olive orchard outside of Athens, where the philosopher Plato would teach. And it wasn't about cognitive education at all. It was heads, hand, and heart. He would have dialogues with them. They would be building stuff. They'd be working in the garden. They'd be playing and sporting and making music. So the whole being of a student was being triggered to grow and be educated. And that's what I'm working on right now. Because it's the best quote of this series, I guess, it's not easy being green. And there's many ways of thinking about green architecture. There's not one way which we're going to teach you. There's 50 shades of green. Some people might be more interested in ecological architecture. Some people might be more interested in technological solutions. Some people might be more, might have a bigger connection with social aspects or developing countries. So why cookie cut a student into what sustainable architecture is supposed to be, which in the technical university is usually a technical approach? Well, there's so many other approaches. Because I think the big question is, where do you put yourself on this little matrix? Are you, do you have a positive attitude in solving the world problems by design, or a negative one? Are you worried and you think we should cut down with many things? And they're both fine. We both need them. Or are you technology minded? Do you think this, like Elon Musk, the solution is in technology? Or do you think we should go back more to nature, natural solutions, and be inspired by nature? I don't think there's one truth, but I do think you have to pinpoint yourself in this scheme to intrinsically be motivated to do your job. And that's why I think the academy model would work better than the standard curriculum model. I work and live on a farm just outside of Delft in the direction of Rotterdam. So the river you see there is the River Schie. And we're working on an academy on sustainable education, especially for designers. And it deals with the head, the hands, and the heart. So, of course, there's lessons to be learned. There's classes, but we'll also be working on the land, building stuff, actually getting to know materials. I was always a bit disappointed that you could graduate on the technical university architecture department and still not know what a brick was. So I think it's important to learn how to build again if you're going to become an architect. And of course, there's the heart. You need to be inspired. We need to tell each other stories. We need a community. And I think the main central questions in every approach, whether you're an industrial designer or an architect or a farmer, is the spiritual, the social, and the ecological question. How do I relate to myself, to the other, and to the planet? I think if you can answer those questions and outline them, your job becomes fun, you have a purpose in life, and it all makes sense. So we're working on the Academy of Sustainability. You have a bit of a view of where this all came from, and I'd like to thank you for now.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. I love the examples that you gave from around the world. And it really honestly sounds common sense, your approach of integrating, whether it be low-tech or no-tech solutions. But that's just me. So I'm curious, how do other people respond to what you do? And how has that changed over time? Whether it be your customers or academics here, because I think you still visit the university from time to time, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, there's a bit of a paradox. If you explain the story, then clients will usually say, "Oh, I love it. Can I have it? Why is this not standard?" Students generally, when they're in their first years and not kind of ruined by the modern academy approach, still think, "Yeah, this is what I want to learn." It's usually the architects that say, "Isn't this naive? Or why would you go for this if there's so much beautiful technology in these modern materials?" Not thinking about the downsides in terms of ecology. So somehow there's this Dutch saying that you can throw away the baby with the bathwater. I don't know how that translates into English, but I'm sure you get the point.
Wasting the good parts.
You're wasting the good parts.
Yeah.
And somehow this has happened in this whole modernization of society after the Second World War. And yeah, I mean, there's this other saying that if you give someone a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The same, if you're trained in technology, your approach will be a technological one. And I think that's only one side of the story.
Right. But still, you managed to graduate from the TU Delft and walk your own path. What kind of customers approach you now? Because you're somewhat of a unique architect, right?
Yeah, I think
so. Unique customers as well. Not everybody.
Well, I have the luxury that I can say no to clients if there isn't ambition. There's this Austrian American designer Steven Sackmeister who says I will only work for clients that are smarter than me. I think that's a bit arrogant, but I like being challenged. I used to have a firm with 10 people working for me. These days, it's just me and my wife working together. So we can cherry pick the things that we learned from. So for me, there's no point in redoing a house once I've done it. So I like this whole mix of traveling, working around the world, doing small scale projects, sometimes big ones, diving into solutions. For instance, we did the first roof in the Netherlands where the roof was, instead of gluing it with bitumen, we used Velcro, klittenband, which was an idea based on nature. If there's these little seeds with the crotches on them and they'll stick to the fur of a dog. Right. that works. So we analyzed that, and we discovered that the NASA space shuttle, the heat shields that are on the nose of the shuttle, actually you can't glue them. There's no glue on this planet that is heat and pressure resistant to come back into the atmosphere. So it's actually stuck with Velcro. So, oh, well, that's amazing. So why cover a roof with bitumen where the poor guy is lifting the thing, breaking his back, he's burning it. It's very unhealthy fumes. Basically, you're combining fire and a material in something which needs to be waterproof, so there's a danger of leakage. And by the time you need to change your roof, you can't get it off. You have to throw everything away. So we devised this roof membrane which was stuck with Velcro, and it was cheaper, it was more sustainable, it was healthier for the roof guys, and it had a better water, water vapor barrier than bitumen. But still, somehow, people stuck to their old solutions, and it never kicked off.
Right. So you're a bit of a trendsetter and kind of making examples that work, right?
Well, not for the sake of it. It's just, I always say that if you give me a blank slate and a blanco check, and you say, just draw me a house, I'm lost.
Well, I'm curious. Would your approach work on the larger scale? Let's take the Netherlands as example, right? Because there's talk of making all of the homes in this country sustainable by, I don't remember the year, 2050. But 2050. But it's a huge challenge because most of it is existing construction.
Yeah.
Right. I live in a house that's more than 100 years old. So would your framework, your approach also work for that challenge?
Well, actually, we did the first energy-producing renovation house in the Netherlands, in Wageningen, which was in 1946, just post-war little... it's in the sheet there. I don't know if the sheet is still on. Sorry, I'm pointing to a monitor, which you can't see at home anyway. This was a post-war little house with a material scarcity and very nice little house. And the clients came up to me after having spoken to 6 architects who said, just demolish it and build something new. That's the only solution. And I was the first one who said, well, why demolish it? I mean, your children grew up here, you spent your life here. I mean, it's your house. Why? So we did a big analysis of how we could transform it into something sustainable. And just by being excited by this challenge, we didn't overshoot it, but by the end of the whole project, it produced more energy than it actually used. And the guy is now driving on a street electricity, which he produces himself. But we didn't stop at just energy. It's on the Wageningen Hill, which is on the side of the Rhine River, and there were actually plants which were getting extinct. And the client was a professor of soil biology in Wageningen. And he said, well, I can't have the house being renovated and these flowers being demolished. So we made a plan for that, and actually it covered the whole roof. So the whole place became more biodiverse than it was before. So I think there's a solution to all problems. And like I said, if you give me a blank slate and a blank check and say, whatever we'll do, I'm at loss. So you need problems to solve, and that is, I guess, what they did teach me at the technical university. Is you need a good analysis, and you need a solution-based mind. So there's a client with his wishes. There's building regulations. There's a budget. There's the site. There's all these problems that have to be solved in one line of a pen. And I usually say, if you add extra dimensions, extra problems, like the wish to make energy friendly buildings or sustainable buildings, it will make the design process a bit more complex. But by the time you have the right line, the eureka moment, it will be a better building. So a sustainable building is not always a good building, but a good building is always sustainable. So call me naive, but I'm a believer that we can solve this with good design. But you need knowledge and you need the right attitude. And it's not going to be, if we think that it's just windmills and solar panels and heat pumps that are going to solve our problems, then you're wrong. But if you look at all buildings, they all have qualities which we can translate into something workable for these days.
Right. So your expertise is architecture, but we're at a university here where there are people studying, researching, teaching everything from physics to math to nanobiology, etc. Do you think that your framework, let's say, like what you said, context, culture, concept, does that translate into other fields of engineering, of design, of science?
I'm sure if you're a nuclear physicist, then this doesn't really make sense. But staying to the decolonizing theme, of course, we export a lot of knowledge, which is not always a good thing, but it could be a good thing. So like the water management is, of course, one of the biggest export products of the Netherlands, and we're helping other countries that don't have the knowledge. So I guess that's a good thing when being asked to help. And of course, I'm sure the water management people will go over, analyze the situation, and transcribe their solutions onto that. But if you look at the biggest, Holland is, I think, the second or third biggest agriculture exporting country in the world, tiny little country. And it's not just tomatoes and paprikas, it's also knowledge. And I'm not sure that is a very good thing. It's basically imposing the Dutch way of dealing with agriculture on countries which are not always asking for it, because there's a way to make money. So to answer your questions, I'm sure there's in the the context culture concept analogy doesn't always make sense to all lines of work here, but I do always think that you have to look at the situation where you're trying to solve something, provide a solution.
If that's the bottom line, then I suppose, I mean, it's like respect for the local context and culture, whatever you're doing, regardless.
Yeah, and I think it's always better to be asked to come solve something than to impose your solution on someone.
But this you've said also in your experience as a student here, which, you know, things have probably changed at least a little bit in the last few decades, I hope. I don't know how much you know about that, but this implies a change in attitude, right? That you said, like, for example, professors in your time, their attitude was technology, technology, technology. So how do you go about this cultural shift? You're doing it, right? You're just doing it the way that you see that the way is fit. How do we do that in the rest of our society?
Well, I think it starts in education. I think I think education needs a paradigm shift. I think this old classical academic model that I mentioned, where you look at the student, the child, the one who needs knowledge. I think everybody has a talent, which the Greeks would call a genius, and everybody has a unique talent, a gift, something to give the world. And I think the main clue about education is locating this gift, this unique gift a person have, and maturing it into something that the world needs, which basically means that you have to provide a good environment, a context in which something can evolve into a good student. So I think it all starts with the education model. That's one. The other thing is that, and that's this is it kind of shocked me. This Metropolis magazine is an American design magazine, and every 2 years they do a faculty survey. And in 2008, the theme of the faculty survey was sustainability. So they went to all the universities in Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and did a huge survey. And very simple question. They first asked all students, do you think sustainability is important? And I said, duh, of course. I mean, it's the 21st century. This is our future. Of course we think it's important. So I think 95% of the students said, yes, very important. We need that. And then they went to the professors and they said, same question, do you think it's important? And only 65% said, yes, well, we think it's kind of important. But then asked, okay, so the ones who think it's important, do you also have the knowledge to teach these students? And only 10% said, yeah, there's knowledge, and there's a professor who knows about it, and we have a curriculum on that. So the outcome of this survey was that 10% of the teachers has to get 100% of the students into the 21st century, and there's a big gap.
That's a big gap.
Yeah, and of course the gap has been closing, but I think the gap is still big. And it's not just about sustainability, it's about sustainability being incorporated in everything that is being taught. Why don't primary school kids get something about sustainability? Why isn't there a class called Future instead of History? It's just not in our system yet.
You have a lot of ideas for the educational system. I'm reminded your last slide Yeah, here, the Academy of Sustainability. I'm going to switch places with Anna Lind because I think she wants to ask me some questions about that.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. How do you see sustainability? What is sustainability for you?
Ooh, that's always a very difficult one to coin it in a term, but I think I can mention what inspires me, and is that if you look at the American Indians, the Iroquois, they had a constitution, which not many people know, and it was actually in the constitution that every act you did had to consider 7 generations ahead. So whether it was cutting a tree or shooting a buffalo, you had to have your offspring in 7 generations, and that's 7 times 25 in mind. So you can't do things that are bad for the future generations. So I guess there's sustainability in that, and that this again might sound very romantic, but if you look at the bedrijfsplan, the corporate plans of Panasonic, they're looking at 250 years, and it's actually in their business constitution. So the founder of Panasonic said everything we do has to be leveled to our vision of the future in 250 years, and it was cut up in parts of 25 years and then in 5 years, but every act has to be deliberate in terms of the future. And for example, in Wales, there's now a commissioner of future generations. So many of the things we're doing now you actually couldn't do if you were really considering your grandchildren and their grandchildren. So I think sustainability is in that. And William MacDonald, the American architect, has a beautiful quote who says, "How do you love all the species of? How do you love all the children of all species in all times?" It's all about love. It's about taking care. Hope this answers your question.
Yes, thanks. And another question, if you talk about the concepts, what does indigenous mean for you?
To be of the land. And of course, in more vernacular cultures, it's of course the people of the land. We associate it with the Indians in the Amazon or the Aboriginals of South Australia. But I guess if you dedicate yourself to be part of this land, you can become indigenous. You don't have to be native. You don't have to be. It doesn't have to be pre-modern, not at all. And whether you're here as a refugee from Syria or you were born here, I don't really care. As long as if you decide to root yourself into this land, you could become indigenous, become native. And it gives you stewardship over the land as well.
And do you feel indigenous here in the Netherlands?
Yes, and I was. It took me a long time because I was born in Canada. I lived abroad until I was 13, and then also traveled quite a lot. And since I landed on the farm over here, I really feel at home. And the funny thing is that my surname actually came from the little river which flows near the farm. And my great grandfather gave our name 500 years ago, and I only discovered this while I was living there. So yeah, I feel I feel like a dweller of the land.
Thank you. And going to the Academy of Sustainability, how do students experience your academy and your summer school? What are the reactions of students that joined there?
They're usually very positive, and I think the biggest compliment I can get is that they're ignited, they're alive again, they feel alive because of course, and if you go to a university, you have to go to classes, and it can be fun, but of course there's a bit of a drag sometimes. But I try to design the academy in such a way that it will actually inspire people. I mean, everybody has these moments in life when you're reading a book or you speak to someone or you hear something, or this is very passionate professor telling that, you're listening and your heart explodes out of your body and you think, yes, this is it. That's what it's about. That's so in these, the summer schools I did, which were 5 days, were really per student, really trying to investigate what their unique talent was and how they could deploy it into something useful. And once you discover that in yourself, I mean, you're off. So if I manage to find their passion, their genius, I'm just helping them. I'm a facilitator for that. Once they find it, I mean, they're off. I mean, that's when I did my job well.
And do you also feel inspired by the students?
Yes, it's always. I used to have a professor here, Karel Weber, who said, "I learn the most from my students," and this has been of all times. I mean, even Benedictus, the cloister monk, who said the main decisions in the cloister have to be made by the young students because they're still fresh in their minds and they'll have heart solutions instead of mind solutions. And yeah, it's even whether it's kids or students or I mean, if you even colleagues, I think there's always dialogue. This whole teacher-student thing doesn't work. I mean, it's like Plato said, it's a dialogue. It's an interchange of knowledge and experience and wisdom.
If you were a teacher here at the TU Delft, how would you integrate then the low-tech with the modern knowledge? How would you do that?
I'd go outside first. You know, I think it's good to be using your hands to know about materials, and whether it's chemistry or architecture. It's good to be working on stuff instead of only learning stuff in your mind and behind a computer screen under a suspended ceiling. So I think activating your whole body in education is an important one.
And is that something that's missing right now by students, that they don't know the ecological part or the local context?
Not all of them, but I think that's why the summer school went so well. I mean, the students were desperate to actually get out, and it all started. I mean, I was inspired by a Canadian architect who had the same frustration as I had. He lived in Nova Scotia and had a small firm, and besides the firm, he would teach at the University of Halifax. And he was frustrated that his students would graduate and not know what a brick is, and you know, go into the world, well, cliche, buy the black turtle sweaters and sit behind the AutoCAD screen all day and become an architect. So he started with these camps, and he invited 10 students, and they'd go into the countryside and they'd pitch their tent and they'd talk about the building they wanted to build, and they would start cutting the right trees and building the building, and that became such a big hit. Because it was about craft and community and culture again. I think that's been very much missed in education.
And what will be the advice for students that are watching right now, if they want to learn more about ancient wisdom or low-tech? What would you advise them?
I think the biggest advice is that you're responsible for your own education. It's your own passion. I mean. And it's not very hard to follow. I mean, whatever excites you, whatever fascinates you, whatever gives you some kind of passion, I mean, follow that path. And if it deviates from the standard curriculum, so be it. I mean, you can either take a new direction, or you can do parallel classes, or you can do workshops. But I mean, stay alive. Don't see university or class as something that has to be finished to get a diploma, because then you land in a job which has work that needs to be done, and you know, before you know it, you'll be 50 and not living your passion. I think we need a bit more passion.
And how did you educate yourself to get all this knowledge? And
well, when the Belmar guys told me that what I wanted wasn't the way they were going to teach me, I thought, well, I can do two things. I can leave here right now without a diploma and educate myself, or I can finish school and also educate myself. So yeah, I'm a big book fan. I have a library of more than 4,000 books on these themes. So I read a lot. I did an internship in South Africa, where in a small architecture firm that also had a construction site. So whatever we designed, we would also build a few months later, which really made sense. So you knew, I mean, the fault you discovered in constructing in your design, you know, you'd learn about it. There used to be a big feedback loop. And I sought people that, especially elder people, that inspired me. So again, you're responsible for your own education.
yes, cool, thank you. I think this was it for me. I give the floor back to Klaas.
Thanks, Annelien. Let me see if I have anything left. Honestly, I think we're done. You've answered a lot of questions. I came into this expecting a lot of information. I did not expect to also be this inspired. So I want to thank you, Jamie, for giving this lecture today. I want to thank you, Annelien, my co-host, and of course the people at home who are watching this. And I'd challenge you also to think about the framework that Jamie has been talking about, again, the context, culture, concept, and how that could apply to what you do and how you live your life. If you want to find out more about Studium Generalis programs, whether it be in this lecture series of Decolonizing Knowledge or otherwise, please look on sg.tudelft.nl, and we'll see you again in the future. Thank you.